Welcome to the final of the futurEU 2024. The finalists have worked really hard to reach the final, so congratulations to them once again. They've worked really hard and we're really happy that they're here.
Hello. Oh, hi. So we'd like to introduce ourselves. My name is Francesco Fimiani, and
I'm Jawahar Fatima.
And we both have been helping in the organizing team of futurEU as well. So we would also like to say that the goal of futurEU is to bring the next generation of European policymakers together and engage in debate with like-minded peers. And all of this is thanks to the support of CIVICA in our funding and promotion. And so we would really like to thank them, as well as our sponsors, the ECF, IAI, NAVA, JDC, SGH, among others. Those are the principal ones, though, so thank you very much. So I would like to introduce our first keynote speaker for today, well, our keynote speaker for this afternoon. So Liz Pender is a Youth Engagement and Communications Officer at the EPLO, European Parliament Liaison Office in Berlin. After obtaining a bachelor's at University of Hull in England and an MA in the University of Osnabrück, she has worked 16 years in various different capacities within the European Parliament and the Council, mostly within press and communications. Please welcome to the podium, Liz Pender.
Inviting me to speak. Shall I do it with the mic? Yeah, okay. Thanks very much for inviting me to speak. As was just said, I work for the European Parliament here in Berlin. We work for all of Germany, and I coordinate our youth programs all across Germany. So right now we're in a very, very busy phase ahead of the European elections. This is our busiest phase every 5 years ahead of the elections. I also know you've had a very busy day, and I'm standing in the way of the decision for the finalists, so I'm not going to take loads of your time and keep the anticipation growing, but I would like to say just a few words about our election campaign, what we've been doing ahead of the European election in Germany and in Europe, and something about the youth vote, how important it is for young people to vote as well. So, as I'm sure you all know, the European election is held every 5 years and is the second largest election in the world, just after the Indian election. So it poses the question, how do you communicate in 24 languages to 359 million voters in 27 countries? How do you manage to get any coherent messaging and campaigning with that quantity of voters and that geographical spread? I would say you have to remain optimistic is the main quality that you need. But in actual fact, what we have is a very long lead time, and we need very clear messaging. Some of you might have seen this week, Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, announced an election campaign of 6 weeks, and there was a lot of comment about how long the election campaign is going to be. Well, in the European Parliament, our election campaign is around 9 months. And so we're just getting to the end of a 9-month campaign. Obviously, it ramps up a lot towards the election, but the soft messaging began sometime around September last year. One thing that's very important in our messaging, and that's really the central tenet of the entire campaign, and that's what differentiates it from national campaigns and political campaigns, is that our messaging is always politically neutral. We can't be party political in any way, and the parties in the European Parliament also pay a lot of attention that everything that we say is very neutral. So our messaging revolves around the importance of voting and the importance of democracy. Why is it important to vote? Why is it important to use your vote? And why is democracy important? So in the second half of last year, we began by focusing on democracy in action, and the fact that the decisions that are taken on a European level have a real impact on citizens across Europe. And that can be perceived as positive or negative, but it's an incentive to vote. It's the incentive to become involved and to become engaged democratically. Often voting is one of the most important tools that most citizens have to be engaged in democracy. And it's really a way to shape the future of Europe and to safeguard democracy itself. Because the European Parliament, we stand for parliamentary democracy, of course, but it's an evolving thing. It lives and breathes with all of the citizens who go to vote, who take part, and who are part of the whole process. So the starting point is the election, and the end point is the legislation that is passed for the citizens, hopefully, or it definitely has an impact on the citizens. But it's not just the voting. Voting is the symbolic part, but then there's also the whole aspect of democratic engagement, the rest of the time, becoming involved, making your voice heard, becoming part of the whole system, influencing the institutions, making a difference. So it's part of this whole package, but the symbolic part is the voting, and that's where it all begins. So we began communicating the date of the election last year and speaking about democracy, engaging with groups, talking about democracy. And then in January, we launched the so-called delivery phase, which is when we launched the slogan, "Use your vote," that you've probably seen or hopefully seen by now. And then at the end of April, we launched the go to vote phase, where we expanded the slogan to "Use your vote or others will decide for you, European elections 6th to 9th June 2024. So that's the aim, just to keep that message simple, clear, and to keep communicating this message. We have 3 main tools for citizens. One is the website, which is the first access point. It's the entry level for most citizens. It's where we have all of the information. Why are elections important? How do you vote? How do you register to vote? Why is it important to vote? And then you have all of the information, resources to download. Then we have a Remind Me to Vote function, which originated out of the fact that people who didn't vote at the last election, the #1 reason, and in Germany, I think from people who didn't vote, it was 39% of them said it was because they simply forgot about the election date. So we've decided they need a new excuse this time. We've got a function, Remind Me to Vote, where we can remind people in the weeks before, in the days before, and on the day itself that they go to vote. And then we have our together.eu community, which you may be aware of. It's an amazing community of really engaged volunteers all over Europe who organize their own events, who are very active. They communicate a lot about different themes surrounding democracy, elections, becoming involved. There's events happening all over Europe at the moment, all over Germany. The website's also got a lot of information resources. It shows where events are happening. In Germany, it's about 20,000 people who are involved. Across Europe, it's just short of 200,000, mainly young people who are doing amazing and very, I would say, very inspiring and very unusual events often. So that's worth having a look at and getting involved. So in addition, these past few months, they've been very busy. We've been organizing events all over Europe, all over Germany, from roundtables of 5 volunteers to much bigger events. We were involved with the local Eye that took place in Berlin at the end of April. I don't know if any of you were there. We had the Leadership Academy in Brussels with 2,500 people. There was a Europe Day in Zittau on the border of Poland and Czechia that happened on Europe Day. It was that had quite a few more people. So we're trying to do lots of different events and different scales. And we've reached a lot of milestones already. We had the 100 days to go. We had the 1 month to go on Europe Day. And now we're 2 weeks to go. So what's happening in Germany? Well, yesterday we screened the live debate between the lead candidates for the presidency of the European Commission. We screened that at the Europa Experience at the Brandenburg Gate. I don't know if any of you saw it. I think the visual beforehand was related to that, to the Eurovision debate. So that was an attempt to have a debate between the lead candidates that really involved all countries from Europe. there was a live transmission, questions asked out of all the countries, and the idea was that it is more in the style of the Eurovision Song Contest. Not quite, but that's the idea. Tomorrow at the German Football Cup, we're going to have banner advertising around the stadium, reminding people to vote, just because of the amount of people that will be watching the football game. And then the next 2 football games from the German national team, which is, I believe, against Ukraine and against Greece. There's also going to be the banner advertising around the stadium, just reminding people to go and vote so that we can try and reach a lot of people that they see that they just see the date and they know when to vote. We also have an election film that I would like to show you, which is being shown all over Europe. You've possibly seen it. All German national broadcasters are showing it at the moment, and that's something that we're coordinating across Europe to try and get that message out. We have an influencer campaign, different spheres of influence, different spheres of expertise as well. So we're trying to sort of tap into that. And private companies are involved. We have Lufthansa, Brussels Airlines, Austrian, and Eurowings, who have Yes to Europe on their aircraft. And in Germany, we're working with the organizers of the largest music festival in Germany, Rock am Ring, to promote the postal vote. Because Rock am Ring is taking place on the weekend of the European election. So obviously everyone who's there isn't going to be able to go to vote. So all of the headliners of Rock am Ring have been recording messages and speaking to their fans on how to register for the postal vote and how they can take part in that. So there's lots of events happening in parallel across Germany, across the EU, just really trying to reinforce this message. However, the campaign isn't worth anything if it doesn't convince people to go and vote. And essentially, we can speak about democracy all we like, but democracy lives and breathes by the involvement of the citizens, the people who go to vote, the voters. So the stronger democracy is, the more people go to vote, and vice versa. So I think it's fair to say there has been a perceived distance to Europe and to Brussels from the electorate. I mean, almost really since the founding of the European Parliament, we've seen voter turnout go down and down and down. And there were some quite depressing years where voter turnout was very low. But at the last election in 2019, we managed to buck the trend a bit and push through the sort of psychological barrier of 50% voter participation. So the voter turnout at the last European election was 50.66%, which was a lot better than other years. I know there's still a lot of room to go there, but just as a comparison, as a context, if we look at the 2016 US election between Clinton and Trump, which it felt that the whole world was involved in and we heard about nothing else and everyone sort of had an opinion, the voter turnout at that election was 54.8%. So it's just to sort of put it in a context that we still have a lot of room to go, but it's definitely going in the right direction. And hopefully this year there'll be an even higher voter turnout. But if we look at a different figure, 42%, that's the percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds that took part in 2019 at the European election. And that's the good news because that had gone up from 28% in 2014. So it shows that the youth vote is underrepresented in Europe. That the MEPs that young people want voted in aren't being voted in the same strength as other parts of the electorate. So we recognize that there's an upward swing and we want to keep the momentum going, but it's very much something that we're aware of in the European Parliament, that we want to speak to young people more directly. We want to increase the youth turnout, especially this year when 16-year-olds can vote for the first time in Germany, in Belgium, in Malta, and in Greece, 17-year-olds can vote for the first time. So it means that just in Germany means there's 5 million first-time voters and 7 age groups that can vote for the first time. And we really want to get as many of them voting as possible, because we see from so many studies that if you don't vote the first time you're eligible, you're much more likely to not vote in following elections. So this is our hope at the moment, that we're doing a lot to try and get people to actually vote. One of the things we asked ourselves is, why is the youth vote so low? And there's different reasons. One is just when you hear that figure, 5 million people, it can seem that your voice isn't important. It's a drop in the ocean. It's not making a difference whether I vote or not. That can be one perception. So that's our job, to show that every vote does count. Part of the issue is demographic. It's the boomers' fault. So there are proportionately just more old people, and their vote counts more. So boomers are people over 60. And they have a more powerful vote because there just are more of them, and they will continue to have a more powerful vote as the birth rate decreases. So by 2050, the share of people over 65 is predicted to be 30% compared to 20% now. And added to this is that older people often go to vote more often. So you have that aspect. And then if you add to the mix the fact that our world has changed over the past few years. When I think of the 2019 election campaign for the European election, it was a very, in Germany at least, very positive campaign. It was very much linked to Fridays for Future. It was often called the climate election. And there was a completely different conversation happening. Since then, we've endured a pandemic. Russia attacked Ukraine, brought war to Europe. There's a conflict in the Middle East. There are new worries about the cost of living, inflation, migration. There's so many different topics that we're talking about in this election campaign that weren't as relevant or even present at the last election. And recent surveys show that there is high anxiety amongst young people regarding their future, which, given everything that I just listed, is not surprising. So we look at the 2024 edition of a respected survey, Jugend in Deutschland, which is youth in Germany. It shows that the main concerns of young people in Germany are related to inflation, which was 65%, and affordable housing, as well as poverty in old age, societal divisions, migration, and the climate crisis. What the survey also showed was a clear shift to the right amongst young first-time voters. And that's true in Germany, but it's also been seen in other countries in surveys that there's been this shift to the right, potentially ahead of the European election. So in Germany, this survey predicted that support for the AfD could reach 22% at the European election. That was supported by other polls, by FOSA and INSA. And in Germany, the age group that shows strongest support for the AfD is that of the first-time voters, 16 to 28-year-olds that were asked. And in particular, the reach of more extreme views across networks like TikTok, because the algorithm also supports that. So AfD videos are seen 10 times more often than other videos. That also plays part of the whole backdrop to the election that we're looking at the moment. So the backdrop to the election is very different, and the possible impact is different. In which case, it's even more important that we get the youth vote out, that we get young people, first-time voters, second-time voters, people under 30, voting. Because we have an example of what happens when young people don't go to vote, and it's in the not too distant past, and it's in my home country. So if you haven't worked out my accent yet, I'm from Scotland. And in 2016, mainly older people, mainly in England and in Wales, voted for Britain to leave the EU in the Brexit vote. And the outcome was 52% for leave and 48% for stay. So it was a very close call referendum, one that could have been swayed. young people were overwhelmingly in favour of staying in the EU. I mean, in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, the majority of the population was in favour of staying in the EU, but it was young people across the board who were more in favour. 75% of 18 to 24-year-olds said that they wanted to stay in the EU. But what happened on the day? What was the turnout on the day? I mean, voter turnout in general was very high, around 72%. But amongst people over 65, it was 83%. And amongst under 25-year-olds, it was 36%. So there was a huge difference between who was voting and who was casting the vote. And it's not the over 65s who are no longer able to do Erasmus, and it's not the over 65s who are going to miss out on the opportunities over their lifetime of the EU. So it's the younger people who didn't go to vote. And it shows that when young people don't go to vote, they end up losing out because, of course, that removes the ability to take part in the policy decisions. But I don't want to end on that depressing note. So I will say that there are 23 million young people who are able to vote for the first time at this election coming up in June. And I'm very hopeful that we'll see a big increase in the voting turnout. And in fact, there was a Greenpeace study that was published last week that showed in Germany, 2/3 of first-time voters plan to go to vote. So that's great. Hopefully that will happen. And to finish, I will just say, remember that your vote has to work harder. And I have no doubt that everyone in this room will, of course, take part and go to vote. But yeah, I'll just reiterate, use your vote. Thank you very much. And then, if it's possible, I would like to show, or are we under time pressure?
Yeah, we're a bit over time, but we will show the video during our first break. At the beginning of our first break, we will make sure to show the video, but just for time's sake, we would like to move on to the next part.
And you may have also seen the video, hopefully, because we're trying to show it a lot. So please feel free to go and look at it separately and download it. Thanks very much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, Liz, for your inspiring words and for coming here today. We really, really appreciate it. Your experience and insights directly from the institutions is extremely important for us future policymakers here at HERDI and for the competitors today. So once again, thank you very much. So now, before we invite the first team to the stage for the finals, let me remind you of some of the housekeeping rules. Each team will present its policy brief with the judges' feedback for 12 minutes. We'll show you a yellow card when there are 2 minutes left and a red card when the time is up, so you'll know when to wrap up. After the presentations, the teams will have to answer 2 questions from the judges and 4 from the audience. For the online audience, you also have the possibility to ask your questions to the team, and you can do so by using the Menti link and entering the code. That is going to be on there.
I would also like to thank our judges once again for coming, and I would request them to introduce themselves briefly, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Sasha Stein. I'm a Security Policy Fellow at the Jacques Delors Center at HERDI School.
My name is Leo Goretti. I'm the head of the Italian Foreign Policy Program at the Istituto Affari Internazionali and the editor of the International Spectator.
Does it work? Yeah. Hi, I'm Arthur Leichtemmer. I'm also a policy fellow at the Jacques Delors Center for Geoeconomics and excited for your presentations.
Hello, my name is Dariusz Mongiaula. I'm from Warsaw School of Economics.
Thank you so much. I would now like to welcome Team 37 on stage. That's Sarah and Marion to please present their presentation.
Um, Hello, everyone. So our proposal is about the European green transition and its effects on employment. So to remind everyone of what we have talked about before, we talked about the importance of the problem. So the green energy transition is going to lead to a decline of certain sectors, but it will also lead to the creation of new jobs in other sectors. And our proposal aims to bridge the gap between the lost and newly created jobs and the skill differences that there might be between them by proposing a green energy Erasmus program, training opportunities to people who are underrepresented in the energy sector, so women, older workers, and minorities. And we are also proposing to open up specific training programs for adults and older workers. Okay. And we also presented defense of our proposal. So we identified two alternative courses of action, one of them being policy in action, which we thought was not a great solution because it would lead to mass unemployment, labor shortages, just a huge disruption of the labor market, which could in turn lead to the emergence of fringe parties and the loss of trust in institutions. The other alternative that we identified is that of early retirement. We found three arguments against this. The first one is that early retirement could lead to problems for people who did not save up enough money for their retirement period. The second one is that it would put a strain on the economies, which already have unsustainable pension systems in many cases. And the third one is that it could lead to a loss of human capital because instead of retraining people to fit into the new jobs, they would just be retired. So now I'm going to overview the problem again in a little bit more detail. So firstly, the employment transformations will affect both workers and employers. The transformations of the labor market might lead to a loss of jobs, but also creation of new jobs. And there will be requirements for different skills. So in our research, we identified three different types of industries. The declining sectors such as coal and lignite mining, crude petroleum production, and natural gas extraction. But we also identified transforming sectors. These are clean energy technologies, such as electric vehicles, for example. We also noted that there are different skill levels needed. So there will be an increase in high-skilled jobs in construction, transport, and public administration sectors, whereas we expect that there will be a decrease in low-skilled jobs in mining, wholesale and retail trade, health, and social services. So our proposals will need to aim to bridge this mismatch in the skill levels.
So thank you. So one of the sort of questions that the judges had raised previously for us and that we tried to answer was how to evaluate which sectors would need to be targeted by our training programs and how to identify the ones that are most strategic to focus on. So the EU already has a lot of data and available information on this, for example, through the Joint Research Center of the Commission or the Clean Energy Technology Observatory, who have already produced reports and identified these strategic sectors. And this can help focus our training programs on the specific skills that would be needed. So in 2021, they noted that the sectors in most need of these new reskilling programs would be heat pumps, biofuels, and solar PV. For example, since 2020, heat pumps have been the sort of main new employers we've seen with the green transition. They account for 26% of the jobs in renewable energies. We also noted that the need for skills was different in terms of where we were looking at in the value chain itself. So, for example, in terms of deployment, here we have very important needs for reskilling There are a lot of shortages expected. This was actually highlighted in a paper by Yannick Janssen, who was here previously judging us. He explained that we need low, medium skilled workers, especially in terms of solar PV installation, but that the deployment would be less important for wind, for example. So we also need to take into account at which stage of the value chain we're intervening to know where do we want our programs, our training programs to do. And in terms of, for example, manufacturing, here the wind industry is going to be much more prominent, going to ask for much more workers and many more skilled programs. And as well for the battery industries, which are set to expand and potentially replace the jobs that will be lost in fuel industries. Hence, this reminds us of the importance of tailoring the training programs to where the needs are going to need to be met, and hence also reinforcing collaboration with stakeholders, they're the ones who know best where these skills are going to be needed. Other questions that were raised during our presentation regarded financing the GEEP, so the Green Energy Erasmus program that we proposed. And for this, we noted previously that we could already use existing Erasmus Plus funds, but we think that we could also levy more funds through public-private partnerships, for example. So these partnerships are collaborations between public and private actors, usually a government, a company, or another private institution. The private partners deliver and fund certain public services, and they share the risks that come with this provision. And then in return, public institutions provide them with the social assets or financial incentives, such as tax breaks. And these PPPs are already used today in certain member states to promote vocational and education training, which we noted previously as a very crucial and important part of training in the EU for the green transition. So using these PPPs for vocational and education training will be especially rewarding. For example, the European Training Foundation notes that this will be important, especially at the regional level, which could therefore help member states with more difficult transitioning industries to acquire the funding that they need. The private institutions would have, in return, of course, formed and trained employees ready to integrate these new sectors and who have the right skills as the programs would then be designed with the help of the stakeholders. We also mentioned financing for the social measures that we mentioned. So we mentioned possibly creating free childcare services for women during training hours. This way they can join more easily. And this could be also funded through existing just transition funds, regional development funds, but also from the money that we think will be saved from pension savings, because as we mentioned earlier, pensions are already under a lot of strain. And therefore, the money could be saved here and be redirected into social measures that encourage training. The EU already has existing funds for pensions, which could therefore be cut back, and the money could be redirected towards these funds. And finally, for the issue of competences, of course, education social measures are usually more within member states' competences, and of course, the EU cannot overstep this issue. However, we noted that similar objectives as for the net zero industry academies, they were still able to work around this issue. What they do is that organizations and projects respect the competencies, but just provide advice and sort of a common source of knowledge for member states to have easy access to. They develop credentials, encourage cross-border qualifications and mobility, and they work in partnership with businesses to make sure that their programs are accepted and are not sort of left up to member states to implement. We also noted that the European Council's recommendations from 2023 regarding skills and skill shortages show that member states have been very vocally in favor of harmonizing and uniformizing training programs, and we therefore expect our proposal to be sort of coherent and commonly accepted by member states. And in terms of the social measures as well, we thought that we could maybe, to encourage implementation, condition some regional development funds on the implementation of these measures, so to encourage member states to implement them by conditioning them on receiving the funds.
So lastly, there were some questions about the issue of relocation. So as you might think to yourself when you hear this proposal, Okay, but the new jobs will not necessarily be created in the same place as where the old jobs are lost. And this is undeniably true. So in this map, we aim to demonstrate, this is from a 2023 paper by McDowell and et al., about the vulnerability of different regions within the EU. So this means that the regions which I hope you can see are in dark blue. They are more at risk of, thank you, they are more at risk of many of the employment in the regions being provided by declining or transforming sectors. And to address the question, we wanted to say that in the transforming sectors, the problem might not be so much of relocation, but rather reskilling. Because, for example, in Germany, there are a lot of car manufacturing companies, but if these internal combustion engine manufacturers switch to electric vehicle production, then this might mean that the factory stays in place, however, people will need different skills. Whereas in declining sectors, such as coal mining, for example, we thought of two things that might be possible. So one is to identify opportunities for renewable energy source development. For example, in Greece, there's a region of Western Macedonia, which is one of the most at-risk regions because of declining sectors. However, solar PV development could be a good opportunity in this region. And also climate neutral and related service industries could be developed to prevent these regions from declining.
So to conclude, as we hope we've made clear, the green transition will raise key questions for employment and especially for skills training. So our program aimed to make this transition smoother for all generations, for young people, young apprentices with the Green Energy Erasmus program, and also by making training accessible to all social groups through, so as we explained, free childcare services, more flexible training, financial compensation for program completion, and also making training more flexible and accessible to all workers. So this fulfills the objectives that we highlight here, so strengthening the EU's economy, especially since jobs will relocate, preventing political backlash against the green transition, and hopefully helping propel the green transition forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Team 37. Time for questions, so judges, you have the floor.
Can I have a question? Have you estimated the costs of the introduction, of the extension of this Erasmus program?
Detail the cost? So what we said could be done to fund for the extra costs that the new program would create. So existing funds, but the new idea that we proposed was public-private partnerships and extending them to Erasmus programs. So, I mean, already the EU, for example, with the EU Battery Alliance, has already been very much in contact with the private sector to try and levy funds and sort of gather stakeholders around training. So we think that by encouraging public-private partnerships, especially for vocational and education training, is going to be crucial because, as we explained, vocational and education training is really one of the key pillars of the green transition in terms of employment and forming the future generations. So if the EU encourages the extension of these PPPs to vocational education training, then we can levy the funds through private and public partnerships in order to fund these new green energy apprentices, if that makes more sense, yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was great. Maybe going back, I hope you didn't address it in the first part too much, but we're approaching the elections now. There's a big debate about is there a green backlash. Yannick, for example, argued there isn't actually as much as there's portrayed to be, but the policy priorities might shift a bit. And I think including SMEs is a very valid point, but I think to really buy into it, they need some regulatory stability, they need to look forward, they need the basics, what skills will be needed, where should we invest into. Do you see where you could build a stable alliance in the EU, or like what challenges could come that don't seem too obvious before the elections now, and where, like, who could be the key players that you would push this proposal to?
So I think one of the main challenges that we came across was the fact that even if, as we explained, there already exists sort of data and information about which skills are needed and which sectors are going to sort of be the ones we need to invest into, these skills are changing permanently. Because, for example, right now, there's going to be a push for higher skilled workers for the development, innovation parts of things. But then in the future, we might actually need medium to low skilled workers for installation, maintenance. So I think one of the main challenges will be how to continuously adapt the training programs so that they actually carry the green transition to fulfillment and in the long term. So I think, yes, it's very important for the EU to be that stable base that, of course, SMEs can sort of have more future projection. And a useful way that the EU is starting to do this is with, I mean, has done this with energy, but could potentially do with these types of projects as well, is with the important projects of common interest. So, for example, using public procurement to sort of secure the trust of SMEs and sort of reassure them that they can make these investments and the EU will sort of take the risk for them on the long term.
Oh, I'm very sorry, I didn't see a mic on my table. I have a question with regards to an oversight of this program. Who do you think should be an organization, an entity, an agency that would take care of looking into sectors and thinking what educational programs they might need and updating them regularly? So is it going to be a national agency with an EU oversight, or is it going to be an EU agency that's going to kind of delve deeper into individual countries? So how do you imagine this administrative structure being organized around it? Thank you.
So we believe that one of the first, or probably the first important step would be to gather more uniform data, because one of the biggest problems with this issue right now is that countries measure things a bit differently. So we believe that it would be useful to, first of all, gather uniform data across the EU to make sure that we really know what we're dealing with. And in terms of oversight,
I mean, right now, the sort of European skills agenda, it's the Commission who's in charge of looking at how it's progressing and how member states can improve along the way. So I think, again, with this idea of uniformizing how we collect data and the recommendations we make for skills and training, the Commission should be in charge of this. But of course, it may be interesting to then look at more sort of sector-specific agencies that could be created, because we've seen with, for example, the success, again, of the EU Battery Alliance, it's good to have more sort of local, sectorized agencies and bodies looking at this, because, again, the skills needed differ widely across sectors, across the value chain, and also potentially could evolve differently over time depending on the sector that we're dealing with. So, yeah, I think sectoral agencies would also be very useful.
And do we have any questions from the audience?
Oh, okay. Is it working? Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was looking at the objectives, which I think are very well linked to the problem statement, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on which indicators would help quantify these objectives, or how you would potentially measure the success of this policy at a medium and long term?
Thank you very much for the question. We actually haven't previously thought about this, but it's a very interesting question, and of course it would need to be quantified in order to make sure that the programs are actually successful. So we believe that this could be done, for example, by participant surveys on a low level, just to make sure that people actually feel that they have gained the skills that they believe are necessary. As we mentioned in our first presentation this morning, currently 38% of respondents to a special Eurobarometer survey felt that they lacked the skills that they needed for the green transition. So conducting similar surveys could be one way. And then we also think that employers should be asked as important stakeholders in this issue as well. So they should be consulted about whether they feel that the programs that are designed are actually useful to develop the skills that they're looking for.
All right, then, well, thank you very much, Team 37. And now I would like to welcome on the stage our second finalist for the team, for the competition, Team 54, so from Bocconi and Sciences Po. Please welcome Anselmo Moscano and Alessandra Turrisi.
Oh.
Prova?
Okay, so no. Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, so welcome back. So it's again Alessandra and Anselmo from Sciences Po Paris and Bocconi University, respectively. So what we're presenting today is the EU Purple Card, and we describe it as a revolutionary immigration scheme that aims at solving three very pressing issues at the EU level right now. Let's review these three issues. We already presented them before. So the three issues that we're talking about are low-skill labor shortages occurring even in the best-case scenario. What we mean by this, we're going to explain in a minute. Generally speaking, we mean that even if the totality of the EU low-skilled workforce was employed, Europe would still face a low labor skill shortage. Then the second most pressing issue is the demographic winter that all EU countries are going to face. Actually, not all of them. A couple will not experience it in the short run, but in the long run, even those two countries will experience it. So it's no country is safe from the demographic winter based on current projections. The third pressing issues that we want to address with this immigration scheme is the human rights violation that migrants are facing at the EU borders. This is a problem in light of the fact that Europe has some externalization issues, right? And this exposes it to geopolitical blackmailing.
Yeah. So as we said before, the current EU framework for immigration has the shortcoming of not really addressing labor migration as an opportunity. In fact, the EU single permit it mainly sets the baseline for procedures for EU countries for EU countries' immigration systems. However, it does not address the heart of the issue, which is setting the acceptance conditions for migrants to be able to travel to migrate to Europe. And for this reason, we think looking at the EU Blue Card, we could, which is a work residence permit, we see like a good example of how we could address the issue of setting acceptance conditions for labor migration. In fact, we present to you the EU Purple Card, which is based on the model of the EU Blue Card. However, it does not address highly skilled migrants, as is for the case for EU Blue Card, but instead low-skilled migrants. And there are three main objectives. The first one is to increase the share of working population in the continent, simultaneously addressing the demographic winter and the labor shortages across EU countries. And second, also reducing illegal immigration. And by this we mean reducing the number of and creating a viable alternative for migrant workers to come to Europe, and consequently also reduce human rights violations. Finally, the EU Purple Card would also provide a beneficial relations for both sending countries and EU countries. And this is because sending countries, which mean third countries from which the workers come from, are going to face a high population, fast population growth, which could lead to structural unemployment in their labor markets, and therefore these countries would face large unemployment, would not be able to absorb everybody in their markets. So when it comes to the target population, as we said before, we expect low-skilled or unskilled individuals with no tertiary education and an age below the EU average. And in fact, it's also the EU Purple Card will not create a competition with other schemes. Existing schemes, and this is because the Purple Card, for example, does not create competition with the asylum seekers procedures, and this is because it's not more permissive than the refugee status. In fact, with the EU Purple Card, after 3 months of consecutive unemployment, a person has to justify their stay, otherwise they are asked to leave the country, which is not the case for refugees. And second, also, asylum seekers cannot always apply for visas from their home countries because of war, because of lack of diplomatic relations, or with destination countries. And asylum seekers also often require an urgent application process. For this reason, we see in the EU Purple Card would take a longer amount of time, and this is because it needs both the time to process the application and then additionally also the time to find an employer.
So one of the questions raised by the judges in the previous phase was about the legislative details of how this policy is going to be implemented. What we thought of is a directive. The directive suits our needs best because it can enable the European Union to establish both minimum requirements in terms of the acceptance rate, this is also a point we're going to come back later, and non-flexible conditions and flexible conditions. By non-flexible conditions, we mean requirements that are very easily verifiable, such as age and education requirement. As Alessandra said, tertiary education would make you unsuitable for the EU Purple Card. Moreover, we also plan to introduce some flexible conditions, and those flexible conditions will be in the context of evaluating education and past work experience. The general rule being that better qualification in education will lead to diminishing returns in terms of point. This is an important fact because we have to remind ourselves that we're talking about low-skilled migrants. So the fact that any additional qualification will not get you more points, they will get you still more points, but less than before. So that's the general reasoning. Formal and priority sector will yield more points to meet each member state needs. Let's now talk about the minimum requirement I referred to earlier. We have discussed this point thoroughly, and we came with an important consideration that we want to share with you. And the important consideration is that even mobilizing the totality of EU low-skilled individuals, those already within the EU, the low-skilled labor shortage will still occur. What this means is that what we need as a minimum requirement is the difference between the total demand needs of EU in general and the total demand needs and the totality of the people, the low-skilled individual already present at the EU level. This difference will yield a certain percentage of the low-skilled labor market, which could be a nice minimum requirement to set for member states. This leaves the possibility for member states to be more permissive if they wish or need so. And it will make sure that what they're pursuing is a genuine, indisputable self-interest. This is key, and we say that because they should not oppose this kind of legislation, right, if they pursue a self-interest.
So you also asked us to define who would determine the shortages. So we thought that so the EU has many different reports on which sectors are going to lack more workers, and however, this also happened. There are also estimates at the national levels, and it's thought that we think that the that states would be best suited to determine exactly the number of people that they would need. So basically, define the labor shortage in their own labor markets. However, so they would have the final word as well. However, a conversation with the EU would be also envisioned.
So let's now move to the topic of settling disputes. We believe this is a very relevant topic because we know that immigration is a very conflictual topic. And so, yeah, we want to make sure that this point is clear. We identify two types of possible disputes that may occur. The first one being legislative-related issues in implementation of the EU Purple Card. And we wanted to share these two considerations. The first thing first, non-compliance with this scheme would lead to a relatively lower productivity and competitivity with respect to compliance states. This is hardly justifiable for a member state, even if the government is ideological about immigration, and even if the voters in the countries are ideological about immigration. So we think this is an important point. Also, standard infraction procedure for EU directive non-implementation would still apply, so that's also an incentive. Also, we identified political disputes. Of course, we recognize that countries would still be against such a scheme. But they could be convinced to pursue and apply and vote for this legislation and apply it uniformly, as they can autonomously determine priority sector and can have flexibility in the scoring system. Let's very quickly review the application procedure. So we said that embassies and consulates would run eligibility check on criminal records and identification documents. And then the application would be scored based on the points-based system that we see here. This is an example, and the criteria are already been explained before. Successful applicants, those exceeding the variable threshold, for admission are given access to Purple Reach, a platform to connect them with employers in the EU. And once they secure the contract, they'd be able to, the consulates and the embassies would be able to issue the card for a validity of 24 months.
So in conclusion, the EU Purple Card is a tool for low-skilled workers from third countries to come to Europe safely. We need to establish a safe route, and this is key for the survival of the EU. For this reason, we hope that the EU Purple Card will solve, will be the solution for a safe and legal migration to Europe.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We now give the floor to the judges for the questions that they have.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. There are existing programs run by countries that tend to have more budget on such programs to educate people outside of the EU, to give them opportunities to gain knowledge, gain degrees outside of the EU and then come to the European Union. Do you think that there should be some mechanisms that would prevent those countries from sabotaging the Purple Card scheme, just to ensure that even if they have such programs, they also still provide possibilities for low-skilled migrants to come to Europe?
To come to Europe illegally, you mean?
No, legally as well. So the point is that they might try to sabotage the Purple Card because they say, we're running educational programs outside of the EU, so we don't want low-skilled migrants to come. We would prefer them to study and then come to the EU. So do you think that there should be some mechanisms envisioned in your project that would prevent those countries from kind of sabotaging those efforts to bring low-skilled migrants to Europe?
So if I understand correctly, you're saying that the sabotage would come from European countries, right? European countries would have the schemes to, yeah. So I think that that even if that is the case, it would still not be covering the entirety of the number of people that like have a low-skilled or unskilled background. So even if that would be the case, I don't think it would undermine the existence of the EU Purple Card or its efficiency or its purpose, because I think that still many countries are not investing enough to re-educate third countries, individuals, before coming to Europe. So I think the two things could still coexist. There is a possible overlap and like possible effect on the number of people reached, but still, I think they're not there is no competition.
Yeah, I would just add a small point. The role of the European External Action Service in this whole mechanism, we would use the delegations of the EEAS spread all around the world to promote and provide support and guidance. So I think that their role in making sure that the initiative is known and there is no sabotage would be extremely important.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is it on? Yeah. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'll go a bit in the opposite direction of Sasha's question and basically challenge it being too successful of a scheme. Because I don't really buy that maybe you would actually reduce costs with this program, because, I don't know, like border control is going to be a different issue. I don't think you can really challenge that to EEAS. So basically, wouldn't you ask, if you put it to the EU budget, with budget constraints, countries being, with the new fiscal rules being introduced, being a bit stingy, perhaps, that you would ask smaller countries with lower minimum wage, maybe less appeal to low-skilled migrants to come to pay more, whereas they would receive like a lower benefit compared to, let's say, Germany. So how could you balance it out to make smaller countries buy into?
Yeah, very relevant question. That's where the variable threshold comes into place. Yeah, we didn't have the time to explain it properly, but by variable threshold, we mean that each country sets a threshold based on their own needs. What that also means is that we expect very large and attractive countries to have low thresholds at some point in time, and then set it higher as their needs are satisfied as time goes on. What that means is that smaller countries, maybe less attractive countries, will have the chance to also satisfy their own needs once, you know, other countries' thresholds are so high that they are more attractive to potential migrants. So we try to sort of introduce a self-balancing market mechanism into place, and I think that would partly address the issues that you're raising.
Yeah. No, my question is about winning resistance by member states, because what you argued in terms of highlighting the loss in productivity and competitiveness, that makes perfectly sense from a rational point of view. But what is at stake here? And I was shocked by the figures before, where migration is apparently considered a concern also by younger EU voters, which is quite shocking, to be honest. But so the point is, how do you allow like member states to sell this to their constituencies? Also because it's very difficult to measure changes in productivity and competitiveness, especially like singling out a single kind of factor like this in the short to medium term. So my question is that something which is really kind of enough to address the concern, the potential concerns of member states vis-a-vis their domestic audiences?
So I think that one of the most successful moves would be to mobilize more loudly employers, because employers are completely aware of the issue. Even small, medium employers, the issue is that they don't necessarily see the advantages for large employers, they do see the advantages of immigration. Small, medium employers, they don't necessarily see it, and they might have issues also with language and other things, but they also need people, and they also need people to work they also need people to work. So that would be part of the population that could help change public opinion. And then if this was a political campaign, like we would definitely need to work on shifting this this narrative by highlighting the opportunity cost. So even though in the short run it looks like a cost, this is not a cost. This is an investment in the survival of the state and families as well. People who have old elderly in their family, they can also see there is an issue with finding care, with finding care workers, with finding so I think that part of the population is already aware of the labor shortages, and demography cannot like even if we all start having kids right now, we cannot satisfy the issues and the requirement of like from the labor market. So it's really complicated. I think now it's very ideologically charged, but we need to start. Maybe a political party can be I think one of the issues is also that the left, for example, is not really seeing this, is following the far right, and is not talking about the benefits. But the benefits are there. We just need to mobilize also, like, for example, left parties to use the benefits narrative.
Yeah, I would just add a piece of data to what Alessandra said. So 26% of companies involved in construction work, they identify as the primary obstacle to the development, to their own development and making bigger projects, labor shortages. So that 26, I would argue that that's a very significant part of companies identifying this as the primary issue. So yeah, just to add to what Alessandra was saying, that employers specifically already know perfectly that this is a problem.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
One question. Could you just tell me why you have chosen directive instead? For example, have you considered also the question of regulation, and what was the arguments in favor of directive? Because there are some differences in the question of negotiations as well as implementations of these two different legal acts. Thank you. Indeed, that was, I think, the first thing that we discussed once we went back to elaborate on this. We thought that a directive would suit our needs best because we wanted to have wiggling room, if you like, to allow for states that would ideologically oppose this idea to have, flexible conditions. So what we mean by that, being able to evaluate by themselves the work experience and the education of potential applicants, and also, this is probably the most important part, being able to identify by themselves the sectors to be prioritized. So yeah, that was the general idea in establishing that EU directive would suit our need best. It's just a matter of flexibility and making sure that even countries that would be leaning towards opposing it would still come to a consensus and eventually vote this proposal.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to both of our finalist teams for presenting such amazing proposals and for all the work that they've put in. We would now like to invite the judges, if they could go to the consultation room to discuss the results. It's room 2.31, and Lisa will guide you there.
And for the audience, we will shortly begin our break, but first we will play the video that we were supposed to play during Liz's speech. So once it's ready to go, and then we will go on to a short break afterwards.
Yeah. Uh, 4:50. So we'll be back at 4:50.
Moi, je garde ça dans le fond de mon cœur depuis des années. J'y pense tous les matins, mais j'en parle pas. Eh bien, Robin, c'est que je devrais pas être ici aujourd'hui. J'aurais dû être morte le 17 juin 1940.
Na 21. jsem měla telefon, že nás obsazuje armáda. což jsme považovali za něco, že to vůbec není možné. To byl takový šok.
How do you feel about what's happened here in Prague?
We hope that we will have again the freedom and our democracy.
J'avais 11 ans quand la guerre a commencé et 12 quand les soldats sont arrivés. Il y en avait partout. Je descends mes démarches avec mon compotier, j'arrive dans le jardin, ta 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 ta. Maman était tuée sur moi pour me protéger. Vous savez, quand on a 12 ans qu'on se relève et qu'on voit sa maman morte qui vous protège, on n'oublie pas.
În Timișoara s-a atras în tineret în fața catedralei.
Mijn vader is Auschwitz gestuurd en daar vermoord. En mijn moeder kon mij meegeven in de wetenschap dat ze misschien mij nooit meer terug zou zien. Ik had geen ooms en tantes, dat vond ik wel raar. Ik had ook geen grootouders. Iedereen had grootouders. Ik had niemand.
Non si deve mai dare per scontato la democrazia, ma bisogna sempre sostenerla e proteggerla.
To 17. listopadu, kdy všechno začalo. Byla veliká demonstrace studentů. Policisté napadli demonstranty, zmlátili je. To byl ten moment, kdy začala ta revoluce, takzvaná.
Pēc neatkarības atgūšanas Latvija bija brīva zeme. Cilvēki varēja brīvi izteikt savas domas par demokrātiju.
Ma col muro di Berlino, secondo me, l'emancipazione di tutta l'Europa.
Lieve Suzanne, lieve Suus.
Jsem ráda, že jsi takový, jaký jsi, a za to tě mám moc ráda.
Je weet, ik ben geboren in een jaar dat de wereld in brand stond. Zoiets bepaalt voor een groot deel je leven. Gelukkig ben jij geboren in een tijd van vrede en welvaart.
Pořád si uvědomovat, že ta svoboda a demokracie tady nebyla vždycky. A že o ní můžeme strašně rychle přijít.
Bisogna lottarla per ottenerla. Bisogna sempre stare vigili e lottare.
Si je peux laisser un message avant de partir, vivez la démocratie. Entendez-vous les uns les autres.
Passt gut auf die Demokratie auf, wenn ich nicht mehr bin.
Je to na mě a je to na nás, na naší generaci. V Evropě.
Hello. Hi. So if everybody could come sit down again, we're reaching the final component of the competition. Before we proceed, we just wanted to please give a round of applause for the judges. Thank you very much for your expertise and your support.
Before announcing the winners, I would like to invite Leo on stage to give certificates to all the semifinalists for all the hard work that they've done and for all of their efforts. So please.
So the first team to please come and collect your certificate for your participation in the competition, Team 16, Daria Prilipchenko and Olya Bezpiatko. Next up, we have Team 24. That's Valentina Mazur, Anastasia Pliashakova, Olya Chornobai. Please come up to the stage. We lost one. Next up, we have Team 45, so Emma Servidio, Beatrice Mangano, and Roberta Tomacello. He'll be back soon. Next up, we'll call up Team 62, Carlo Maria Pagliula, Federica Leaci, and Chiara Scalco. Then we have Team 76, Diego Chussi, Tomás Noriega Velasco, and Sebastián Ramírez. And then we have Team 89, Nicolò Guerrini and Matteo Secco. And then for Team 54 and 37, it'll be given towards the end when we do the finalists.
The popular vote, if you could just stay for the popular vote, the popular vote, if you could announce.
And now we'd like to announce the winner of the popular vote. And the winner for the popular vote is Team 37.
So now we'll give the mic over to Leo so he can announce the winners.
Thank you. First of all, like on behalf of the jury, I would like to thank you all. I would like to thank the organizers for having given us the opportunity to engage with all these kind of brilliant ideas. And we all agreed that it was for us also very thought-provoking and a stimulating exercise. And I would like to thank all the competitors, the semi-finalists and the finalists alike, because they really brought up a lot of ideas and debates from a kind of younger and fresher perspective, which we think is pretty much needed. So thank you. Now, it's been quite difficult to decide this morning who we thought could proceed to the finals, and it's been equally difficult this afternoon to decide between two brilliant kind of policy briefs, and I must say that we were impressed also by how deeply and kind of thoughtfully the two teams engaged with our points. So we were impressed by both teams, and this made the decision really difficult. Having said that, I was asked to announce the runner-ups first, so the winners will implicitly know that they have won. So according to our unanimous kind of opinion, the runner-ups in the 2024 futurEU competition are Team 54. And I would like to invite...
Didn't get that on photo.
Now the winner.
Oh, we're doing the winner.
The winners, if you both can come stage as well. Thank you. Picture. Oh, yeah. Ben.
Oh, yeah, with the...
Yes, just a final kind of notes that as was announced, we from the Istituto Affari Internazionali, better myself, I will be in touch with you very soon to make arrangements, if you like, to publish a revised version of the policy brief in our YAI commentary series. I definitely think it's worth it, and I hope this is going to help disseminate these ideas a bit further, okay? Thank you.
Would you like to say something?
This is the hardest part of the day, I think. First of all, thank you very much for the popular vote. That was very unexpected, and thank you, I think, from both.
Very nice, thank you.
And thank you, of course, to the judges as well for listening to everyone's proposals. It was a very interesting day to see what everyone's ideas were live, not just from reading your policy briefs. And we're, of course, very happy with the results and look forward to publishing.
Yes, and we would like to also thank our friends who are watching the live stream for supporting us, and to all the organizers for putting together this amazing competition. Thank you so much.
And with that, that concludes the futurEU 2024 competition. Thank you all who participated. Thank you all for coming. And yes, have a great rest of your day.
Yeah. And I would also like to say a special thank you to Greta and Amber
Yes.
for leading this team forward and for making sure that this competition is as amazing as it was for all of you. So thank you, both of you.